ask some questions, but I think President is also keen to get some feedback from the audience on the framework to set the discussion. I want to ask, there is some perception that the government hasn't been very explicit in terms of reducing its government expenditure in the budget. Can you explain why, or you have some plans in terms of accelerating the, I know reforms were mentioned, but in terms of actual reduction in government expenditure?
We are taking a new look at government expenditure. We find there's a fair amount of wasteful expenditure. And just as much as we've raised taxes, we have a duty to reduce expenditure. There are projects which go on, which we don't know why the projects were taken on. Money is being spent, sometimes in the same area for the same type of projects by two ministries. So we have to rationalize the expenditure and reduce the expenditure. Otherwise, to meet the expenditure, we will have to keep raising taxes further and further. A government's role must be confined to what is needed. What is needed to develop the economy, what is needed for the social sector programs, what is needed for infrastructure, not beyond that. We have 1,280 odd spending units. Do you think that we can keep track of what is happening in 1,800 and odd units, 1,280 odd units? We have to reduce the spending units, firstly, and then control the expenditure in each of those. It's a big task. And the opposition also suggested to go back for zero budgeting next year. With zero budgeting, there we'll reduce the expenditure further when questions are asked. So that, I think, is the answer. We are reducing spending to not to increase taxes, and as the economy expands, there will be more money for the private sector to invest.
Okay, thank you very much. The other question, the budget did have a greater focus on export-led economic growth. On the other private sector is complaining about higher taxing, doubling of taxes for exporters. What would be your response?
Very simple. We need the revenue. But we have to remember, in most parts of the world, in Europe, the export industry pays the same tax as the local industries. There is no differential. Then the question comes whether by giving tax exemptions, we are actually subsidizing export industry, which is otherwise not competitive. So I think we have to look at both those. We want a competitive economy, a competitive export industry. Then we give them concessions to start with, but thereafter we certainly will have to get the revenue from the export industries. Otherwise, you become export-oriented economy and you will have less revenue than you have today. The government has a duty also to maintain the exchange rate, a stable exchange rate. That's what we have to do. So let both combine go ahead. This is a time of transformation for all enterprises, local or export-oriented. But we have to ensure whether it's local or export-oriented that they are certainly competitive. And they need not be in any way subsidized by the state.
Okay. Because your budget hinges a lot on boosting revenue, you think you're confident of raising that revenue, and also will this high interest income taxes will be temporary, or you think it is here to stay?
Let's first get to the objective and then see what we do about income tax.
Thank you. President will have to leave.
But I want to tell you, I mean, we've operated in times when income tax was 50 to 60%. In the 70s, when I was involved in my father's business, we used to pay 60% income tax. So 30 is a bit high to what we have paid earlier, but these are 30 is being paid in many countries by many enterprises.
Okay. So the President has thrown the challenge, actually. We have a lot of exporters as well as from the private sector. Anyone like to make an observation There's some rowing mics around. Yeah.
Morning. President, my question is, if you look at world over, the governments have become efficient by looking at technology. Right? If you look at India, the e-government, we have been talking about this for the last 20 years, the efficiency that could be achieved by a national level initiative on e-government and also centralizing all the citizens' databases. Today we have bigger problems in your plan, in your budget. The cash subsidies are very welcome, but we also understand that 50% of that cash subsidies, even now, is not being channeled to the most deserving people. So I'd like a response on that, please.
No, I agree with you. We have to have e-government. We are moving on it to digitalize the government very, very quickly, which also means we can certainly have better control over the welfare payments given out to about 40% of our population. Secondly, e-government is necessary as a starting point for a digitalized economy, which means that it's very much easier for the Inland Revenue Department to operate and collect taxes. So we are going that way. It is needed.
Thank you very much. Any more observations or questions? Yeah. Okay.
Neela has a...
Yeah, Neela, yes, that's right.
Your Excellency, I think one of the biggest problems we're facing is the brain drain. And how are we going to stop people, young people, who is it's a very important part for business. How are we going to stop that? Or alternatively, will you open up immigration, like work permits, so that people from other countries can come and work here? Because in Singapore and all these countries, their success was they opened up the job market for people from all over the world to come and work here. So I think the brain drain is a very big problem right now. There's such an exodus of young people.
Can I add, Batu? The Singapore FT also was sort of thrown out because of this mobility of labor by the previous regime.
No, mobility of labor was not on that. Singaporeans didn't want it, we didn't want it. There were other vested interests and certain government departments, both they stopped it. Some have gone to the courts also. But court has not given a stay order. And therefore, we are going ahead to implement it. There are only 2 or 3 areas that require some adjustment, but to inform court, and we are going ahead. We had a discussion yesterday, and I couldn't understand why it was just a decision to deliberately not implement the FTA. Same with India, same with China. Thailand, and we were anxious to have an agreement, then the officials take up the position that businesses here don't want an agreement with Thailand. But I told them, you don't represent businesses. You represent the government, which has said we want an FTA to go ahead. That's why I have the International Trade Office. On this brain drain, I mean, I am very concerned about it. But on one hand, people have decided the future is not good here and to move out. So what can we do about it? First, improve it. Secondly, we'll have to go for mass training, vocational training and education. So some of them who are leaving are like accountants and others. So we'll just have to increase the number of people having MBA, having other qualifications, and education becomes that much more important this time. We have to focus on the post-school education and experience. Finally, if any sector is facing a shortage of manpower in Sri Lanka. For that sector, we will allow, I think the government must allow a certain number of specified people to be recruited. We'll have to do that in some other sectors.
Thank you. Any more questions?
But do you know that there are a large number of people who are working, if you go down Vennappu and Athandiya side, there are a large number of people who are working from India. They haven't got any papers and they didn't come through the airport either.
Yeah, Johan, yes.
Your Excellency, we welcome the approach of opening Sri Lanka as a shipping and a maritime and a logistics center. One of the areas that is restrictive in this is the restrictions on shipping and freight forwarding companies having more than 40% Sri Lankan ownership. In terms of not wanting to put up the flag of protection, is this something that can be addressed?
It's an issue that has to be addressed. But isn't it easier if you address it within the industry? At the moment, the industry is split between those who want to protect it and those who want to open it. No, we are taking a serious look at it.
Hi, Mr. President. I'm Talal from Deloitte. I want to know, what are your plans on, innovation, especially, because I'm currently doing a paper for the IMF on the relations between innovation and economic growth. We find that there are two ways for economic growth. One is population increase. In our case, we are an aging population. So what about R&D, a relationship between the private sector, universities, and the government?
That is essential. The relationship between universities, the research, the private sector, and the government. We are giving our attention to it, and we will come out with our proposals, hopefully with the help maybe of the World Bank or US government. Which one? Is it the World Bank or is it going to be the US government? Okay. Right.
Mr. President, you wanted to encourage foreign universities to build up in Sri Lanka, and you have expressed the matter several times recently. So there's this issue where you have to pay for those foreign universities in dollars. Since the exchange rates are skyrocketed, it's become very unaffordable. Do you have any plans to mitigate the situation in near future?
If foreign universities come, we will have to allow, as far as the Sri Lankan students are concerned, for the payment to be made in rupees. But then the number of Sri Lankan students that are taken might be confined to 25%, 30%, 40%. They have to decide on the numbers. For the others, we have to earn the dollars. That's the best way. We have to work out a formula how they can then take out their profits, which they made in rupees. So those are details that have to be gone into. But we are also at the same time promoting not-for-profit Sri Lankan universities, non-state Sri Lankan universities to come, and they can have arrangement with foreign universities. That would be easier for us. But there too, if you're in any way taking on foreign staff, lecturers, then we'll have to make provision to pay them in dollars or whatever other foreign currency they desire.
Okay, Mr. President.
Yeah, Mr. President, you discussed about modernization of agriculture. I mean, I personally have proposed many times about bringing in technology, sensor-based farming, and all these sort of technology. But the attitude of Department of Agriculture has been always negative, and it's not been great. I'm sure you must have encountered all these things by now. What is our real strategy in our agriculture? Modernization is just a very vague, too long. I mean, what are we going to do about it?
Thank you.
Change the attitude of the Department of Agriculture. we will restructure the whole agencies. Firstly, I'm looking at a core group of Agriculture Ministry, Plantation Industry, and technology ministry with non-government people to overlook it. For instance, we are establishing a new department of cinnamon. That will be outward-looking one that we would work with. Mine exports department will go off because nothing should be mine exports. All should be major exports. Agriculture, tea, all. We will restructure. There will be very radical restructuring of those departments and agencies. And we are also looking, the three ministries will initiate with the private organization joining in the Agrotechnology University. It will provide certain postgraduate courses, but connected it will be the TRI, the RRI, CRI, then the Rice Research Institute, and all the other research institutes will also be connected to it. So that way, we hope that we will modernize the whole agriculture industry. The change has to be total; it can't be halfway.
President, this is about the export competitiveness. Now, we have seen a lot of garment industry companies are being relocated in different parts of the world due to the competitiveness. So, what's your prediction about it after this new tax implementation? In my opinion, it might further reduce their competitiveness. Would like to know your opinion about it.
Firstly, this year, the exchange rate is very favorable to the exporters. But there are other issues we have to remember. Firstly, are we competitive for that industry? We have low-wage apparel industries and high-wage apparel industries. The low-wage ones will keep moving out. At some stage, the Bangladesh ones will move to Africa. So there will be one group that will keep moving out. So you have to see how you can increase your technological input and go upmarket in those instances. That's one of the issues. The normal T-shirts, the denims, the shorts, all those are ones that will keep traveling around. What we can do our best, we should do our best to retain them here. But also remember, as our wages go up, that this will be less competitive and they may move out. So I don't think it's only the question of the taxes. There are many factors playing in it, and certainly the export industries will talk to them separately. But apparel industry will also have to look at the lower end of it, how long we can keep it. Certainly as a government, we'll try to keep it as long as possible. But there come a time. Look at Singapore, at one time it grew out of the apparel industry. Korea grew out of the apparel industry. Taiwan economy was the apparel industry. But all those have moved out of those countries. So there will come a time that we have to face this and look at the post-low-wage apparel industries and how we go high up. We shouldn't lose it. But then we should look at how we can adjust to the new situations.
Your Excellency, I'm Michael from Mitsubishi Corporation. My question is on debt restructuring. There has been a lot of talk on the debt restructuring timeline getting postponed, or we might miss the IMF board decision in December. What's your honest opinion on the time it might take to reach debt restructuring completion with the private creditors as well as the bilateral creditors?
Well, we have two alternate targets. One is December, other one January. Because we have to remember that China and India have not really gone into debt restructuring earlier. So you have to give some space to them. Secondly, in case of China, it was agreed that we start the discussions after the party congress was over. So the party congress was over only in the first week of November. It was end of October. So we have to start. We started the discussions now. We are trying our best to conclude it and have it before the board by December. Otherwise, we'll have to go for January.
Thank you, Mr. President. In terms of attracting tourists with higher spending potential, despite the currency depreciation and shopping being attractive, they don't really have avenues to spend. We don't have these top-notch brands, nor hotels such as Four Seasons or anything here. Any focus on shopping-centric tourism in Sri Lanka?
Well, it will not only be shopping-centric, we are looking at many other areas, like I said, cruise tourism. We are looking at opening out some large resorts which are nature-oriented. Go upmarket as far as our archaeological sites are concerned, have museums and others. So we will look at all those. Shopping, yes, but I wouldn't say that shopping will be the main area. It will be other activity that we have in mind. Yes, we need more people who will run high-end hotels, but we do have some boutique hotels here which are charging well beyond $500. Some go even to $1,000. The small hotels market, I think, been developing itself. The larger hotels cater to what is available, but as we push for high-end tourists, there will be more hotels coming which can really attract tourists. We need some good names, addition to the good names we have here, to attract tourists. But we should not think that the foreign names alone are good enough, because we have got our own brand names, which really is good, and we must help them to upgrade. And many of them are operating in India and in the Maldives and some in the Middle East. So while we encourage brand names to come here, we must also encourage our tourist hotel companies to go upmarket and build on the brand names they have created.
Mr. President, there is a suggestion about the exporters being taxed. My suggestion is now that 30% tax, whether we can get that in dollars itself. We are looking at about $12 billion revenue. If we can get it up to about 15 billion, assuming 10% margin, that's about 1.5 billion the profit. So 30% tax would be about $500 million a year straight to the reserves. So look at the option of getting that in dollars. It's a suggestion.
Okay, I think the Secretary, Ministry can look at that.
Thank you. Certainly, in fact, we have gotten this proposal. This is not the first time that we are in this proposal, so we will consider that in the future.
His Excellency, I have a small question. Will we go for a domestic debt restructuring? If so, what is the impact on the banking sector and the whole Sri Lankan citizens?
Well, we are trying to avoid damage to the domestic structure. But everyone will have to take a share of the losses. But so far, we are looking at the foreign debt. Then, as far as the local debt is concerned, let's see. We are working to minimize it so that there are no need to panic on it. If all the taxes come up, we may be able to avoid it completely.
Good morning, President. This is just a suggestion. In most of the industries, what I have seen is when there is a new trend which comes for the industry to take off, our policies are not yet ready. But in other countries, already the policy is in place for future trends in most of the industries. For example, right now, if you take India, they actually working on autonomous mobility. Even their roads are being designed actually for that. But I don't think we have even thought about it. So in every industry, if you can actually create a department or maybe some institution which can actually work on the future policy framework so that when the trend comes, our infrastructure is ready to take everything off. Thank you.
If you create departments, there won't be any changes. We will have to look at how the industry and government can work together.
Mr. President, I come from the construction industry. Just want to ask, right now the construction industry has fallen in Sri Lanka, and I believe one of the main reasons is because the single biggest employer in Sri Lanka used to be the government, which amounts to about 80 to 90%. But now that we have to look forward and go towards the private sector, what are your plans in changing, in the sense restructuring the construction industry to go from the government as a client to the private sector as a client?
Well, one, it will depend how fast the private sector takes off, and also what are the requirements of construction. For instance, if it's modernizing agriculture, the requirement is less. But if you're having manufacturing, the requirements will be more, and hotels. So all that depends how fast the private sector takes off. As far as the government is concerned, is that we will have to pay you the monies that we owe you. And the government share in the of construction will come down. But we have to get the private sector moving. And you can't really bring up the construction industry unless a lot of foreign investments come into the country. So the first part is certainly to liberalize investments here and the foreign investments to come in. The more foreign investments that are there, the more buildings that will take off.
President, we haven't seen much traction in the port city, which is infrastructure is already ready. Why is it sort of still there is not much progress?
Two reasons. First one is, of course, the present economic situation. Secondly is, what is the objective of the port city? When we had started it, it was to be more for offshore services and certain domestic activity. But then it expanded into tourism, to casinos, anything you name it, and you can have it. So I don't think people will come in on that. If you want to get business in, you have to focus on business and go for that. And it had to be a new business center. So then let's focus on business and go for it. If you have hotels there, with your hotels out there, doesn't make a difference. A lot of people may not stay there. They'll find the hotels out to be cheaper. There'll be a group that will come who will take apartments. But basically, it has to be a business center, and we should focus on the business activities and not try to do everything there, most of which can be done outside.
Mr. President, there was a chat on the IMF deadlines, and you said that it either could be December or in early January. So once the IMF comes on board, that means we need to have a discussion with India, China on the bilateral debt restructuring with those two countries. So with all of that, in the discussion stages, what are the realistic deadlines once IMF board level approval comes and you go to London, Paris clubs, and then actually the reserve starts building? So since Dr. Veera Singh is also in the panel, couple of questions. One, what are our short-term reserve targets for the next 6 months? And how fast would the government initiate the state-owned entity restructuring? There is a committee being formed. What's the plan going forward? You did mention in your speech as well, but in terms of execution, how fast are we looking at these things happening? Thank you.
Well, as far as the negotiations are concerned, what we have to do is to finalize the negotiations with India and China. The Paris Club is already agreed to it, and India and China has to come on board. Those are the main players. But with the IMF, we've agreed on the staff level agreement. Going into the private creditors will not be problematic. It's these two. So it is going to take a bit of time to negotiate. Other than that, we think the rest of the running road should be smooth traveling. Far as we are concerned, I think by December we'll be able to get the timelines for the 4 or 5 enterprises we have mentioned in my speech on the reserves and the rest of the restructuring. I'd ask the governor to brief you on it.
But thank you. In addition to what the President mentioned on the process, what we need right now, the priority is to obtain financing assurances from bilateral creditors. So that is, once we get that, and also we engage in good faith with commercial creditors, then the fund can go to the board and approve the program and start dispersing money, as President mentioned, is probably in December or hoping at least in January. So it does not mean that we complete the restructuring process before that. So actual restructuring and finalizing the restructuring terms and the debt exchange all will happen after IMF start dispersing money, somewhere probably in December, January. And then we have another about 6 months to complete the full process and do the debt exchange with commercial creditors and do the finalized agreement with bilateral creditors on how they're going to give us a relief and extension of maturity. That is a process. So, and on the reserve targets, once we start the IMF program, obviously we need to, even IMF tells us or not, we need to build up our resource to a much more comfortable level from where we are now. This is the reason why the going forward, once the IMF comes in, then there will be, obviously, ADB World Bank will also be supplementing external financing, and the debt restructuring process will also give us a relief in terms of debt relief that will also ease the burden on debt service payments. And also with the confidence coming back to the system, we would expect other investment, like foreign direct investment, portfolio investment also will start flowing in. With that, we can build up the resource, and also we hope that exports sector will continue to perform, obviously maybe little slower next year as a global situation, but still we would hope that with the policies, foreign exchange, earning sectors will continue to perform. As a result, our target is to at least to bring back the level of reserves to where we had in a couple of years, at least to level that we had in 2019. So that is a little much more comfortable level. And also this is much more comfortable given the lower debt relief. Because when we had 7 billion reserves end of 2019, we still had $6 billion per year debt service payments. So that was not a comfortable situation even at that level. But if we get a relief from debt restructuring, external debt servicing would be much lower, then that kind of reserve levels would be much more comfortable. That will help stabilize the currency. That will help stabilize the inflation. Those are the kind of targets that we are looking forward to once we get the IMF approval.
Thank you. Few more.
Mr. President, being an exporter, like if I come back to the exporter's dilemma, now currently the central bank guidelines suggest that we have to convert all the export revenues. The government allows us to operate, buy material and all, but there's no hope for the future expansions, future investments. So the natural tendency for all exporters would be to move out of the country and go to tax-free destinations and operate from there. So don't you think that your policy is backfiring and reducing the revenue in the future?
Now you have to look at the dilemma of the government and the country first. I don't think, firstly, the short-term issues I'll ask the governor, but on the long-term issue, if you say that you're profitable only if it's tax-free, then it means the long-term you're not competitive. You operate from some country, you should be able to pay the taxes. And you have to take into account, maybe we've gone high at 30 at the moment, but that's a matter to be adjusted later as we recover. But if you have to go always to a country which is tax-free like Dubai, you can do that, but then you're at a base level. And where are you going to export from? If you move out of Sri Lanka and you're exporting Sri Lankan goods, what's the guarantee those goods will be available to you? Someone else will step in and take that. He'll have a lower profit, but he breaks into the trade. So if Sri Lanka is your source of exports, you have to stay here. Otherwise, someone else will come into the thing with a lower rate of profit, he'll break in or she will break in. And then they will see how they can carry on thereafter. I'll ask the governor to give the answers to the short-term ones.
Yeah, I think the short-term measures we have implemented as a result of balance of payment crisis, asking exporters, especially foreign exchange earners, if you think about exports, they are basically doing what they do is basically using all local resources, add value and export. It's not that you are using Bangladesh resources and export. You use resources here, make a profit. If you make a profit, then you have to pay taxes. I mean, if you compare any industry, another part is with the currency depreciation, only the foreign exchange earning sectors have benefited, and those are the ones who have been able to make profits. At the cost of non-foreign exchange earning companies, say construction sector affected a lot, because currency depreciation has affected their businesses significantly. They are making losses. Even some domestic transport, trade, all basically now at this situation are making losses. But this is at the cost of those industries. Export-oriented industries are making profits. And both are using domestic resources, using domestic value addition, employ people here, and use all the facilities. What is the rationale? Only export-oriented industries are paying a different tax rate compared to same people who are doing business here. That's the first argument. Second one, what you say, exporters are moving out for their operations to Dubai, Singapore. Why they are moving out? Because it's easier to do business there. It's not because maybe tax reason, maybe one reason, but if you look at last 3 years and even several decades before, export industry enjoy the preferential tax rates, 14-15% compared to normal taxes that others are paying. So my question is that even last 3 years, with the lowest tax rate that you enjoyed, have the export industries stopped moving out their operations to Dubai, Singapore? Have they expanded here because low tax rates? Are we satisfied with the growth in exports compared to some of the markets? For example, Bangladesh, Vietnam. 10 years ago, we were all at the same level, 10, 20 years ago. They have been growing very fast. But with all the tax concessions and balanced BUI tax concession for 15, 20, 25 years for some export-oriented industries, it's all taxpayers' money. So have you seen the result of these concessions, this tax expenditure? That basically being funded by everyone here, other industries. I think it's not a fair system. Obviously, there are a lot of other reasons why people are moving out of the business. And as President said, some industries will have to move out because these opportunities are different. And I don't mind apparel industries going to Bangladesh, expanding their business operations, and as long as they are improving their services here and moving out from low wage to high wage. These wages are high, they can't sustain, and this structure will have to change. It has to diversify. But I personally, this is my view. I'm not an authority to taxes, President and the states there. My personal view is that tax has to be fair. People who are doing business in Sri Lanka, we should be paying a fair, equal rates of taxes. It's only out of the profit. Corporate tax, exporters or any other industry, it's a tax on profits. And the argument that if we move now because of that reason, we have to see the evidence with all the low tax rates that we had for last several decades. Have they expanded? They're already going out for certain reasons. And the temporary restriction, obviously, we don't like to have these temporary restrictions. That's only because of the balance of payment situation. We want to liberalize and let the exporters do the way they would like to business. But right now, whether we have imposed restriction, that's why we have been able to at least provide basic essentials even for you to operate here in terms of supply of diesel, petrol, all these things. If we don't do that, even exporters wouldn't be able to operate in this country. That's one reason. Second one, still I can say we are monitoring the situation. On average, exporters, they repatriate 100%. There's some improvement, but still they keep in dollars 75%, which means actual value addition, is it only 25%? Exporters are adding value? No. It has to be on average 50%, but still somehow we don't want to go after all these people because it's not an administrative burden, but we would encourage, at least if you earn foreign exchange, there's a responsibility in this kind of period for them to repatriate and convert whatever the necessary local expenditure at least, and help your own industry and other industries to operate in this difficult environment. Once you come to stabilize, obviously, we don't want to have those kind of administrative measures. We will obviously liberalize. And then you can do business freely, but this is all temporary situation, temporary measures that I can assure you that.
President, the only factor is that while domestic situation remains challenging, you're imposing taxes at a time when the outlook for exports are fairly questionable, particularly from the apparel sector. The global markets are depressed. So is it the right timing? I know you will say yes, but what would be your answer to the exporters who have already flagged off that exports are going to come down going forward in the next 6 months from the apparel sector?
I think apparel sector exports will come down anyway, because if you look at the America and Europe, the recession is setting in. Already the apparel exporters are signaling that export numbers will be down. But there's also the other issue. Now, how do we find money? How do we find money for the people? We asked the IMF, all say the same thing. You have to tax everyone alike. So at some stage we have to adjust to it. And we might as well adjust to it now. It will also make we know in what areas we'll be competitive. But the question is this: in USA, whether you are exporter or importer, you pay the same tax. On the cars that they make, that Ford makes, whether they send it out or in, they pay the same thing. Same with Nissan, Toyota, all the electrical goods, whether it's China, Korea, East Asia, Southeast Asia, everywhere. The exporters have to pay the same tax as the local based enterprises. So at some stage, you have to bring that in. Unfortunately, we are bringing it at this time. But we will see many of the export industries will be able to carry on maybe. And this year, in fact, was a year in which the exporters made good money. You got it in dollars and you converted it to rupees. So you can take that shock. If you do it at a time when the rupee was strong, it would have been far more difficult for the exporters. But then you have to be here. You are unfair by the domestic industries, which will also get affected when we ease out the para tariffs. So both sectors are going through difficult times, so you have to be competitive. Otherwise, what are you going to do if the domestic sector says we are going to fold up? I don't agree with this thing, okay, if you don't give it, we are going abroad. You are going to Dubai. You go to Middle East. Okay, we intervene and put some tax on what goes to Dubai. Then someone else will grab it in Sri Lanka and send it out. Look, government can make it easy or difficult for people to export. So this thing of you don't give it to us, you are going to Dubai, all right. We can always look at what you sent out earlier and where you are taking it now. And either put tariff or non-tariff barriers there. So let's not get into this game. We are all in this country. We are all suffering now. We can all get up and go.
President, you mentioned about where do we get the money. There was an estimate that the additional increase in taxes on exports will bring about 50 billion rupees. And the question was asked, why can't you reduce 50 billion from defense expenditure and meet that revenue shortfall?
I can reduce 50 billion from defense expenditure, but then I must reduce the armed forces at the same time. Now what are you going to do with well-trained soldiers who are unarmed, who are unemployed? These are easy questions. We have to reduce armed forces. We are looking at defense 2030. But at the moment, now we are allowing people to go out at 18, but I don't think the number going out next year will be big because there is no employment market. If there's an employment market, we have to go through with it. Earlier we said put anything on defense. But I can't take 50 billion out of defense today without destabilizing the country. That is basically, without stability you can't go. But my question is this, it is not taking the 50 billion away. At some stage you got to tax the export industry. If you don't tax it today, you have to tax it tomorrow. And what are you going to have? You won't have export industry to tax because there would have been utter chaos. About 25,000 unemployed people in the armed force are thrown onto the streets. What's going to happen? Easier said than done.
Thank you, President, for being very frank. Any more questions? Just take, yeah.
My question is on state sector reform, and just on one particular issue you had mentioned before, Your Excellency. It's Sri Lankan Airlines, which has had a huge hole of $1.3 billion for the last many years. My question is that you tried to do a privatization drive in around 2016, 2017, and it didn't go through. But why would anybody come in and buy Sri Lankan Airlines now if it was a privatization or a PPP you're looking for, especially with the current situation now? And if you can't do a privatization, do we have the political will to kill it, or will we keep funding it from the treasury? That's another question for the treasury that I have. And will you keep draining public funds even more?
Firstly, we are going to carry the debt. It won't be passed to the new buyer. So that's one. Secondly, they can have 51% and control it or more. So I think in those circumstances, there'll be people who will be interested in it. You want to have some airlines who are interested who can run it. If you look at the routes, especially to India and some of the Asian countries, it's good. We have some of the European routes which are not utilized. For an established airline which wants another airline, this is a good proposition.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. President. As a manager in the foreign company, I want to know, when do you plan to float the exchange rate?
The problem is, it is sinking, so I can't float it. When it can float, it will go long.
Mr. President, since everybody is now talking about restructuring, just want to know your thoughts on how you're going to restructure the legislators. I mean, basically, integrity is also part of the business confidence that you can build into your reforms. So, do you think that there'll be new reforms coming into the legislators? I would like to have a non-political answer because I know.
Yes, we are looking at now bringing the oversight committees, large number, one with financial committees. Many of them will have 5 youth representatives. We have to put up the criteria. We are bringing in the Parliament Budget Office. I will bring in a code of conduct for the MPs that can be enforced. We are telling them to look at the new a new election system. We'd like to do away with the preference. So this is what we are doing to change the system. But we can't change the system unless the voters also change their attitude. All these, of these 225, 174 or 76, 74 have been elected by the voters. Each voter had 3 preferences, and they went and decided on 3 of them. They left out the others. So what you are having here is for 170, nearly 175, the wish of the voters. You can blame the parties for the remaining 29 or so that's come on. But remember, under this, you have to choose a correct person. You chose a party, and you chose 3 people. So what we are trying to do is, there are 2 ways you can do it. Have a list system without a choice, and then you look at the list and you decide who is good. Or otherwise, have a mixed system where you elect about 150 or 170 members of parliament, and the rest are given on a PR basis to the losers. So one of the 2 systems has to come in. That is the basic change. But this parliament, nearly except for 29, the rest have all been elected and chosen by the voters. And one that they didn't choose.
Mr. President, just one question. I think in terms of when we spoke about legislation as well, we speak about improving our economy and improving business to grow in the country, but something that nobody really talks about and something we should be doing is we also need to, I feel, look at the legal system where it's not very conducive to disputes being resolved quickly, things drag on in courts. Like, how do you feel in terms of restructuring the court system as well, in terms of making it more efficient for people to get resolution, for things to move fast? As in, we have an arbitration system in the country which is non-effective because it always ends up in court. But if we want to bring in more foreign business, bring in more FDAs and foreign investors, do you feel that we need to improve our arbitration system as well as make it stronger and make the court system more efficient, more business conducive?
No, we have to first got to improve our arbitration system. Most companies, investors, enterprises go for the arbitration system. We've got to improve the arbitration system first. Far as the courts are concerned and delays, it's a matter to be discussed with the Chief Justice and the judiciary. Maybe in some instance you can have separate courts to be set aside for commercial work, maybe like the port city. These are issues to be discussed. And one of the 2 main issues is whether you are going to have day-to-day sittings, of which there are people who are for it and against it. All these issues have to be identified, and we have to go ahead.
Okay, we'll try and sort of release His Excellency the President. I have one final question. I know you had a message to the private sector. I know during your budget speech you did make an appeal to the MPs. How confident are you that this budget you will see bipartisan support for this budget? And why do you think there should be bipartisan support?
Well, this is for the future. It's a question whether you are willing to stand by it or not. There are 2 categories there of members who are opposing it. One are those who believe in the old system. Second are those who accept this is good but can't have the courage to say we are going to vote for it. Now we will get the budget through. So you will have to judge the 2 categories, whether they are going to favor the private sector or not. One are sort of politically oriented towards the other end. The others are afraid to take the decisions. So rather than ask me, you must ask the others who didn't vote for it, why didn't you vote for it? And tell them what you have to tell them.
Thank you very much. Please give a round of applause to President for valuable time and, more importantly, taking up questions and responding. Thank you very much, sir. And we'll proceed with our rest of the panel discussion.